What makes us, living in a world where a phone can fit a universe in its memory and a car can almost drive itself, look back with such fascination at the clumsy stones and simple sticks that ancient people once held in their hands? Why do we find ourselves strangely drawn to the image of a figure hunched beside a flickering fire, working patiently on a piece of flint or carving the tip of a wooden spear? It's not just curiosity. There's something deeper and almost magnetic in these silent artifacts of forgotten ages. A sense that in those early moments, something essential about us was being born. Imagine walking through a modern museum, glass displays glittering with the oldest tools known to humanity. At first glance, these chipped stones, crude axes, and broken blades might seem primitive, even laughable compared to our dazzling technology. Yet the longer you stare, the more a peculiar realization creeps in. Every leap we've ever made, every building, every invention, every civilization, springs from that first trembling step when someone dared to shape a stone with intention. What if these tools, as rough and basic as they seem, contain secrets not just about survival, but about the very roots of what it means to be human? We care about ancient tools because, whether we realize it or not, they are the fingerprints of thought itself. Before there was language, before there was writing, before there were even stories told around the fire, there was a moment when someone looked at the world and wondered, what can I do with this? It's an astonishing act, the beginning of all progress. This urge to change, to improve, to solve a problem with your own hands. Somewhere in that long, silent dawn, our ancestors gazed at a world of threats and possibilities and made a choice. They would not simply accept things as they were. They would imagine, tinker, experiment, and build. And in doing so, they shaped not just stone, but the entire trajectory of our species. Perhaps that's why, deep down, these ancient tools never really feel like museum relics. They are not just objects frozen in time, but living questions, puzzles that still challenge us to imagine those first hands at work. What kind of courage did it take to split open a stone, or to lash a sharp flake to a stick? How did the inventors of old see the world? As an endless struggle, or as a playground for ideas? As we trace our fingers over these chipped blades, we sense the presence of minds that were, in some ways, just like ours. Restless, creative, hungry for solutions. There is also the thrill of mystery. Each ancient tool is an unfinished sentence, a clue to a much larger story that no one can ever fully read. The people who made these tools left no diaries, no blueprints, no names. Their voices are lost to the wind, but their ingenuity survives. Sometimes, archaeologists find a particularly elegant hand axe, a beautifully symmetrical blade, or a tiny bone needle. And for a moment, time collapses. We feel a shiver of recognition, the distant echo of the first engineer, the first artist, the first dreamer. And let's not ignore the unexpected connection we feel to these makers. For all our technological brilliance, we still battle the same questions. How can I stay safe? How can I make life easier? How can I provide for those I love? Each tool, no matter how old, is a record of an answer to those timeless questions. In a sense, our smart devices and engineered wonders are just the latest in a very long chain, each link forged by someone facing a challenge and daring to reach for something better. So when we peer into the ancient past, what we are really searching for is a reflection of ourselves. We want to know how we became so clever, so adaptable, so unstoppable. We want to discover the first spark that set our minds on fire. The tools of the cave people are much more than curiosities. They are the first chapters of a story that has never stopped unfolding. By following the trail of these early inventions, we do more than satisfy our curiosity. We rediscover the restless spirit that still drives us to dream, to build, and to change the world. Picture a world without boundaries, where forests stretch unbroken for days and rivers wind their way through untouched valleys. A world so vast and wild that every sunrise brings not routine, but pure uncertainty. There are no towns, no paths, not even a word for tomorrow. The first people moved across this landscape as shadows among giants. Mammoths, lions, herds of animals whose strength dwarfed their own. Their lives balanced on a thin edge, caught between the raw beauty of nature and its constant, indifferent danger. This was not the romantic wilderness of stories. It was a place where each day demanded a new answer to the same ancient question: how will I survive? In this world, every moment mattered. The wind could change, rain could fall, and suddenly a dry patch of ground became a trap. Thunder rolled in the night, and without walls, the darkness pressed close. Hunger was a constant companion, prodding the mind to notice every detail. The way a root clung to the earth, the pattern of hoofprints near a waterhole, the brittle crack of a twig underfoot. Here, even the smallest insight could be the difference between eating and going hungry, between shelter and cold. But what sparked the leap from simply noticing to actually creating? What invisible line did our ancestors cross when they first picked up a stone and saw not just a rock, but a possibility? It's easy to imagine them as passive creatures living at the mercy of their environment. Yet in their world of endless risk, there was a kind of quiet daring, a willingness to question, to test, to transform. Perhaps it began with a single spark of frustration, a stubborn shell refusing to open, a fruit hanging just out of reach, a bone too tough to break with teeth alone. In those moments, instinct alone was not enough. Somewhere, perhaps in the hush before dawn or huddled against the evening chill, a new kind of thought flickered to life. What if this could be easier? What if the world was not only something to endure, but something that could be shaped? The urge to experiment, so familiar to us now, was born not in comfort, but in necessity. Imagine the first time a person threw a rock and saw it break open a nut, or dragged a fallen branch to cover the mouth of a cave. There must have been a gasp of delight, a sense that the impossible had shifted, if only by a fraction. It wasn't magic, but something close. The realization that hands, guided by an inventive mind, could change reality itself. This was the dawn of creativity, the secret engine that set our species apart. At first, the attempts were clumsy. Stones slipped, branches snapped, nothing worked as planned. But slowly, through repetition and observation, patterns emerged. Some shapes felt better in the hand, some stones broke more easily, some sticks bent just enough to serve as levers. Failure became a teacher, and the world itself, its textures, weights, and sounds, became a laboratory. We will never know the exact moment when ingenuity first sparked. No fossil records records the birth of a clever idea. But what matters is that the process began. A dance between problem and solution, between imagination and stubborn fact. Over generations, the landscape itself seemed to change, as objects found along the way became objects made for a purpose. The wild world, once an unyielding opponent, became a place full of raw materials for those willing to experiment. Human hands and minds, working together, began to carve a new path, one in which survival was not just luck, but the reward for daring to invent. It's humbling and thrilling to realize that every tool, every invention, no matter how simple, began as an answer to a deeply personal need. The story of human ingenuity did not start with grand ambitions, but with everyday struggles and quiet hopes. And so, beneath the ancient sky, among the shadows and the firelight, the first chapter of invention was written, not with words, but with the courage to try, to fail, and to try again. This restless urge would ripple forward through the ages, carrying us from the first chipped stone to every innovation that followed. If you could step into the world of our distant ancestors for just a moment, the sense of constant threat and longing would be overwhelming. Nothing came easy, neither warmth, nor food, nor peace. Every dawn brought with it new trials, each one woven into the very fabric of survival. There were no guarantees, no second chances. A forgotten fire meant a freezing night. A missed opportunity at the watering hole could mean days of hunger. Everything that makes our modern lives predictable was missing, and in that raw emptiness, ancient people faced problems so urgent that they pushed the very limits of human creativity. Hunger was relentless, a shadow that stretched across every season. Edible plants were scarce, scattered and hard to find, their secrets guarded by bitter tastes and hidden poisons. Animals were fast, fierce, and often much larger than a lone human could hope to confront. Imagine the challenge. A carcass left behind by predators might provide precious calories, but cracking open tough bones to get at the nourishing marrow inside was nearly impossible without help. There was no certainty about the next meal, only a restless drive to search, to risk, and to learn. Cold was another unyielding adversary. Unlike the thick fur of wild beasts, the skin of early humans offered little protection against the bite of the wind. Nights could be long and merciless. A sudden storm or an early frost could sweep through, leaving entire groups huddled together for warmth, teeth chattering, desperate for shelter. Even the smallest miscalculation, a fire gone out, a shelter swept away, could tip the balance. The world did not wait for mistakes to be fixed. Then there was danger, silent and ever-present. Predators moved silently through the grass. Snakes hid under stones. Insects carried unseen threats. Every corner of the world seemed to hold a challenge, demanding both caution and ingenuity. The environment itself, in all its grandeur, was indifferent, a beautiful but perilous stage on which every day was a test. It wasn't just the world outside that demanded solutions, but the world within as well. Old injuries lingered. Hunger and cold made minds sharp but anxious. Children needed care and protection. Without tools, even the smallest daily task, digging for roots, cutting tough hides, cracking open seeds, became an exhausting struggle. Survival was a never-ending puzzle, with new pieces added every day. What nature withheld, however, became the greatest teacher. It wasn't comfort that inspired the first inventions, but necessity. Hunger and cold didn't just threaten, they demanded action. With every failed hunt or ruined shelter, the mind began to search for new ways, new answers. What could be used? What could be changed? Every stone, every branch, every bone offered a silent invitation. Try me, shape me, turn me into something more. The drive to survive pushed ancient people to experiment, to take risks, and to notice details that others might have missed. The need to solve problems, to protect loved ones, and to outwit the indifference of the natural world became the invisible thread weaving together each small step forward. What was missing from their world, security, ease, abundance, became the fuel for discovery, lighting a fire that would never be extinguished. So, when we look at the earliest tools, we see more than objects. We see the echoes of urgent questions and hard-won answers, the quiet determination of people who refused to let the world simply happen to them. The relentless challenges of hunger, cold, and danger became not just obstacles, but the very reason humans began to imagine, to build, and to transform the world around them. In the endless tapestry of ancient life, the creation of the very first tools was never the result of a grand design or sudden revelation. Instead, it was the outcome of 1,000 small moments, some accidental, some inspired by necessity, all woven together by the quiet genius of observation. Imagine an early morning, cool and misty, a figure squatting near a riverbed. The world is silent, except for the trickle of water and the distant calls of birds. In their hands, a simple stone. It could have ended there, just another rock picked up and tossed aside. But something shifted. Perhaps the first true tool was born from frustration. Maybe it was the stubborn shell of a nut refusing to crack, or the thick skin of a root that teeth could not penetrate. In a moment of impatience, a stone was slammed down, harder than usual, sharper than before. The nut split open. The root gave way. It was a small miracle, and the world in that instant became just a little more negotiable. The early people who walked this earth were masters of noticing. Their lives depended on their ability to read the landscape, to interpret the slightest change in the wind, the patterns left in the mud. In this constant state of alertness, they began to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. A jagged rock wasn't just a stone, it was a potential edge, a future blade. The trunk of a fallen tree, stripped of its branches by a passing storm, suggested the possibility of shelter, of leverage, of protection. Much of this discovery happened through trial and error, and sometimes pure luck. Perhaps a stone slipped from a hand, hitting another rock below and breaking in a way that left one side sharp and the other comfortable to grip. A curious mind picked up the shard, turned it over, felt its weight, and realized it could slice through hide, dig into earth, or scrape marrow from a bone. There must have been a sense of wonder at this transformation, the recognition that something so ordinary could suddenly be powerful. From this point on, observation and experimentation danced together. People began to seek out certain shapes, testing stones against each other, learning which kinds would break and which would crumble, which could hold an edge and which were too soft. Their senses became finely tuned to subtle differences: a glint of quartz, the cool heft of flint, the brittle snap of obsidian. They learned to listen for the clean ring of a stone when struck just right, a sound that promised usefulness. Sometimes the act of tool-making was born from watching the world itself. Animal bones, picked clean by the teeth of predators and scattered across the ground, became models for pointed sticks and digging tools. The grooves left by water on rocks, the holes bored into wood by insects, even the way branches broke underfoot, all of these offered hints, silent instructions, waiting to be noticed. But it was not enough simply to notice. It took a willingness to act, to risk failure, to try again and again. Each new tool was a question as much as an answer. Would this work? Could it be better? The earliest tools were simple, but each one was a leap of imagination, a declaration that the world was not fixed, but open to change. In this quiet revolution, the hands and minds of our ancestors began to shape more than stone or wood. They began to shape the very possibilities of human existence. With every cracked shell and carved bone, the boundaries of the possible shifted a little further. The first tools were more than objects. They were proof that the world could be transformed by thought, that even in the face of hardship, humans could reach beyond what nature provided and make something truly new. For most of us, a stone is just a stone. Countless gray shapes underfoot, easily ignored and quickly forgotten. But for the early people wandering through ancient landscapes, every rock under the open sky carried hidden potential. What set one stone apart from another was more than luck or convenience. It was the quiet art of selection, a skill that demanded patience, vision, and a kind of intimacy with the earth itself. The difference between an ordinary rock and a chosen one was the difference between survival and struggle, between a missed meal and a full belly. The first toolmakers became expert judges of possibility. Their eyes moved quickly over the ground, skipping past the unremarkable and lingering on stones with just the right weight, just the right shape. Over time, their hands learned to read the world in new ways. A smooth pebble worn by river currents might fit perfectly in the palm, ready for pounding or grinding. A chunk of flint with a certain curve invited transformation, its glassy surface promising razor-sharp edges. These were not random choices. Early people became, in a sense, the first geologists. Long before the science had a name, they learned to spot clues in color, texture, and heft. Sometimes the perfect stone was not nearby. People journeyed far from camp, searching along riverbeds or at the foot of cliffs, hunting for rare materials. This quest was not a luxury, but a necessity, a mission driven by hunger and need. If the only rocks at hand were too soft or crumbly, a tool would break just when it was needed most. Over time, certain regions became known for their superior stone, and the knowledge of these places, like secret maps, was passed from one generation to the next. The moment a suitable stone was found, there was a kind of private ceremony. Before any tool could be made, a silent calculation took place. Was this stone heavy enough to smash, yet light enough to wield? Did it break in clean lines, revealing edges that could cut or scrape? Did it feel right in the hand? Sometimes the answer was obvious, a shard of flint already sharp and inviting. More often, the choice required imagination, the ability to see not what the stone was, but what it could become. Shape mattered. A rock that fit snugly in the fist could be thrown with power or used as a hammer. A flat stone with a thin edge made a good scraper or knife. The first artisans began to look for stones that offered these possibilities, learning through trial and error how to predict what a block of flint might reveal if struck in just the right place. Sometimes they searched for hours, rejecting dozens of rocks before settling on one that felt promising. Color and texture became part of their secret language. Some stones gleamed faintly in the light, hinting at hardness in strength. Others, dull and chalky, crumbled too easily. Patterns and lines running through the stone hinted at weaknesses or strengths within. Even sound played a role. A sharp tap with another rock produced a ringing note in the best material, a flat thud in the worst. This careful selection was the difference between a tool that lasted and one that failed at a crucial moment. Over generations, a tradition grew, not of mindless gathering, but of thoughtful choice. Stones were no longer just debris scattered across the earth. They became valued resources, objects of attention, even pride. In learning to see what others might overlook, early people taught themselves a profound lesson. The world is full of hidden promise for those willing to look closely. Each chosen stone was more than a tool. It was a sign that humans were learning not just to accept the world as it was, but to shape it with vision and intent. The line between the ordinary and the extraordinary, it turned out, was as simple and as complex as the choice of a single stone. Somewhere in the blurred depths of prehistory, when the first faint traces of ingenuity began to appear, a particular object emerged. A tool so simple and yet so powerful that it would quietly revolutionize the fate of our species. It was not an elaborate invention, nor a masterpiece of design, but a primal, unmistakable shape, the hand axe, or chopper, forged from a single stone and cradled in the palm. This was the first true universal instrument, a humble yet astonishing breakthrough that set humanity on a new and irreversible path. At first glance, a primitive hand axe might not impress. It was often little more than a chunk of flint or quartzite carefully struck along its edge to produce a roughly triangular shape, one side thinned and sharp, the other left blunt to rest in the user's grip. Yet within this apparent simplicity lay a genius for versatility. This tool could crush, split, cut, scrape, dig, and defend. It was, in essence, the original all-purpose device, the Swiss Army knife of the Stone Age. What made this early tool so transformative was not just its function, but its universality. For the first time, ancient people held in their hands something that could solve a whole constellation of daily problems. With a hand axe, meat could be butchered from a fresh kill, roots dug from stubborn ground, wood and bone shaped into new forms. It could break open the hardest bones for the rich marrow inside, slice through the thickest animal hides, and even serve as a weapon in moments of danger. The design was intuitive, durable, and, perhaps most important, easy to copy, spreading quickly from person to person, camp to camp. The reason this tool became the cornerstone of early technology was not a matter of chance. Nature presented endless challenges, each requiring flexibility and quick adaptation. Carrying a single implement that could do the work of many gave its bearer a vital edge. With a universal tool, a person could travel lighter and respond to sudden needs without a clutter of specialized implements. This freedom to move, to act quickly and decisively, became a quiet revolution, a shift in thinking that echoed through every later invention. But the rise of the hand axe was about more than convenience. It marked the birth of planning and foresight. Creating such a tool required the user to picture the end result in their mind, to see the possibility in a rough stone and shape it with intention. The process demanded patience, knowledge, and a sense of craft that would become the hallmark of later human culture. It was an act of transformation, the first step in turning raw nature into a servant, not a master. Even more remarkable was how widely this idea spread. Archaeologists have found hand axes on nearly every continent, evidence of their lasting value and the shared spark of creativity across distant lands. These tools, unchanged in design for tens of thousands of years, became silent witnesses to the spread of humanity itself, traveling with their makers as they ventured into new and unknown territories. The hand axe was, in its way, an equalizer. It allowed groups and individuals to face the unpredictable together, pooling their skills and resources. Teaching others to make and use such a tool became part of community life, a quiet transmission of knowledge that laid the groundwork for all later education and cooperation. Looking back, it is easy to overlook such a plain object. Yet the emergence of the first universal tool was a momentous leap, proof that the future of our kind would be shaped not just by nature's accidents, but by intention, by design, and by the quiet confidence that comes from holding the solution to many problems in the palm of your hand. The hand axe was the silent promise that, from now on, humanity would meet the world not as passive recipients, but as inventors ready to shape destiny with every new idea. There is a subtle but powerful difference between an object simply found in nature and an object transformed by human hands into something purposeful. A difference that reveals not just the development of technique, but the birth of a new way of thinking. In the ancient world, this distinction became the boundary between surviving and thriving, between being at the mercy of the world and bending it, just a little, to human will. The leap from picking up a stick or a stone to actually crafting an instrument marked the emergence of a hidden revolution, the psychology of the first engineer. At first, necessity drove the earliest experiments. The world was full of things that could be picked up and used, if only briefly. A pointed bone, a heavy branch, a jagged piece of rock. These objects offered temporary solutions, but their usefulness quickly faded. They broke, slipped, or simply failed to solve the problem at hand. There was a moment, somewhere in the deep past, when someone recognized this gap, not just as a frustration, but as an opportunity. It was in that mental space between what was and what could be that the earliest designers began their work. The first step was simple: observation. Ancient people watched how certain shapes fit the hand better, how some edges bit deeper or lasted longer. A stick with a particular curve might lever a stone from the earth, while a flat rock scraped hides more efficiently. Through use and failure, patterns emerged. The seeds of improvement were planted in every repetition, every small success. But then, something extraordinary happened. An act so quiet it left no record but the tools themselves. Someone looked at a branch or a stone and imagined a different form, a better version. They began to modify, to strip away bark, to chip an edge, to grind a surface smooth. Each deliberate change was a vote for intention over accident. These early inventors didn't simply accept what nature had given them. They reached forward, mentally and physically, to create something that had never existed before. This was the beginning of conscious design, the spark that would one day lead to all of humanity's achievements. The difference between an object and a tool was not only physical, it was psychological. With every improvement, the toolmaker had to hold an idea in mind: the purpose of the tool, the steps needed to achieve it, and the memory of past attempts. This required not just skill, but imagination and memory, the ability to plan and reflect. The ancient mind was learning not just how to use things, but how to create them. As this mindset took hold, the tools themselves began to change. Hand axes grew more symmetrical, easier to wield, and more effective. Scrapers gained sharper, more consistent edges. Even the materials changed as people sought out better stones, tougher woods, and new ways to combine resources. Each step forward was the result of countless small choices, countless silent experiments, and an unending willingness to learn. The psychology of these ancient engineers can still be glimpsed in the tools they left behind. The careful symmetry of a finely crafted blade, the polished surface of a stone shaped by endless hours of grinding, the subtle notches and grooves designed for a perfect grip. These details speak of minds that were always reaching beyond the present, always refining and perfecting. To move from simply picking up what was available to consciously designing solutions was an evolutionary leap as significant as the taming of fire or the invention of language. It was the realization that the world could be shaped not just by the forces of nature, but by the focused, creative efforts of the human mind. In that realization, the ordinary became extraordinary, and the story of invention truly began. To truly understand how ancient people first began to change their world, you have to imagine the moment when force itself became a tool. Not just a response to danger or hunger, but a creative act. The scene is simple. An early human sits with a rough stone in one hand, a second stone in the other. The intention isn't to defend or to destroy, but to transform. This is the dawn of the technique of the strike, the moment when hands and minds combine to unlock the secret potential of the physical world. There is nothing accidental about the first purposeful blow. It begins with close attention, a slow turning of the stone, the search for a natural weakness, a line or curve where the material might yield. The hands adjust, grip shifting, wrist tense but controlled. Then comes the strike, a measured, deliberate motion, the force directed with surprising accuracy. The sound is sharp, the sensation immediate. A fragment splits off, and suddenly the stone is different. It has a new edge, a new possibility. The discovery of how to shape stone through striking was both an art and a science. At first, every blow was an experiment. Too soft and nothing changed. Too hard and the entire stone might shatter. But through patient repetition, ancient toolmakers learned the language of materials. They noticed how some rocks fractured cleanly, leaving razor-thin flakes, while others crumbled into useless dust. A single well-placed hit could turn a dull lump into a cutting blade, a heavy core into a hammer, a sharp sliver into a scraper. This process demanded more than brute strength. It required a growing sensitivity to the properties of stone, a sense of timing, angle, and force. Over time, patterns emerged. The makers realized that holding the stone at a certain angle, striking along a natural ridge, produced the best results. The more they practiced, the more their confidence grew. The world around them, once resistant and indifferent, began to feel like a partner in creation. The act of shaping by striking also became a kind of ritual. Families and groups would gather, the air filled with the rhythmic tap and clack of stone on stone. Knowledge was shared in gestures and demonstrations, the wisdom of the hands passing from one generation to the next. Children watched and learned, their first hesitant attempts greeted with encouragement and laughter. The creation of tools became a social event, a moment when skill and creativity were celebrated. In time, people developed more advanced techniques, using softer stones as hammers to avoid shattering the workpiece, resting the object on the ground to absorb shock, and even using antler or bone as softer, more flexible strikers. These innovations gave greater control, allowing for finer edges and more complex shapes. Tools became lighter, more elegant, and specialized for different tasks. What made this era so remarkable was not just the inventiveness, but the spirit behind it. With each new technique, ancient people pushed against the boundaries set by nature. They refused to accept the limits of their environment. Instead, they experimented, adapted, and improved, driven by the belief that their own efforts could unlock new forms, new tools, and new ways to live. In those moments by the fire, as sparks flew and stone split, something profound was happening. Humanity was taking its first steps as a true maker, a shaper of nature, a creator of new realities. The technique of the strike became the heartbeat of progress, echoing through the centuries in every invention that followed. The world would never be the same. Not every breakthrough in early toolmaking was the result of careful planning or deliberate skill. Sometimes the most important discoveries arrived by accident. A missed strike, a slip of the hand, a stone that broke in a way no one expected. These moments, born from error and chance, became the hidden engine of progress, quietly shaping the course of human innovation. In the unpredictable world of the first toolmakers, failure was never just failure. It was an invitation to see things differently, to notice the unexpected possibilities in the debris at their feet. Picture an early human, focused on shaping a rough stone into a useful hammer. The intention is clear, a tool for pounding, for crushing. But the stone resists, cracking along a fault line and sending a sharp flake skittering across the ground. Frustration rises, but then curiosity intervenes. The flake is picked up, turned over in the hand, and examined. Its edge is thin, almost as sharp as a predator's tooth. By accident, a new kind of tool has appeared, a blade, ideal for slicing meat or scraping hide, something no one had set out to make, but which quickly proves its worth. Stories like this must have unfolded countless times. A botched attempt to split bone leaves behind a sliver perfect for piercing or sewing. A failed hammerstone shatters into fragments with points and notches that can be lashed to a stick. Even the messiest pile of stone chips, swept aside as waste, becomes a treasure trove of inspiration. People learn to look for promise in the leftovers, to experiment with the byproducts of their own mistakes. Some tools were not designed, they were discovered, their forms hidden until accident revealed them. These happy accidents did more than add variety to the ancient toolkit. They changed the way early humans approached their work. Toolmakers began to expect the unexpected. Each mistake became a question. What else could this be used for? Over time, the process grew more playful and inventive. The stone flakes, once considered rubbish, were sorted and saved, tried out on different tasks, shared among the curious. A world of new shapes emerged. Razor-thin blades for butchering, sturdy points for hunting, scrapers for preparing hides. In this way, error became a teacher. The unpredictability of stone forced the mind to stay open, to see the world not as a set of fixed categories, but as a field of shifting opportunities. Some of the greatest innovations in early technology, blades, burins, even the first needles, were born not from mastery, but from openness to surprise. The willingness to explore what went wrong became as important as the skill to repeat what went right. This spirit of discovery left its mark on more than just the tools themselves. It fostered a culture of curiosity, where even the youngest members of a group could stumble upon something valuable by accident. The process was communal, the knowledge shared through laughter, storytelling, and imitation. Everyone learned to pay attention to what others might overlook, to celebrate the strange and the unplanned. The story of early toolmaking is, in many ways, the story of learning to embrace imperfection. Each jagged edge, each oddly shaped fragment, each failed experiment opened the door to a new idea, a new solution. The ancient landscape was littered with the evidence of trial and error, and every piece told a story, not just of frustration, but of possibility. As time passed, this knack for turning accidents into advantage became one of humanity's defining traits. From the first unexpected blade to every new form that followed, people learned that progress was often waiting in the places no one had thought to look. What began as a simple mistake could become the spark for the next leap forward, proof that even in the earliest days, human ingenuity thrived on the unpredictable gifts of chance. As the centuries unfolded and the rhythm of daily life continued, early toolmakers began to look at their creations through a new lens. The world was no longer a place where one universal implement could solve every problem. Instead, people saw that different challenges called for different solutions. This was the birth of true craftsmanship, a shift from improvisation to intention, from making do to making well. With it came the first wave of specialization, the quiet emergence of dedicated tools, each shaped for a specific purpose. It started perhaps with the memory of a task gone wrong. A hand axe, perfect for breaking bones, was too heavy for delicate cuts of meat. A flake sharp enough to butcher an animal dulled quickly against tough wood or stubborn hide. Ancient minds, restless and observant, noticed these limitations and began to imagine alternatives. What if there could be a tool just for slicing, another just for scraping, a third for boring holes in bone or antler? With this new perspective, the toolkits of ancient people slowly diversified. For meat, razor-thin blades appeared, flakes or splinters chipped from high-quality stone, prized for their cutting ability and easily replaced when they dulled. Hunters and gatherers soon recognized the value of keeping a handful of these small blades ready for when the hunt was successful or a carcass was found. These meat blades became essential not only for survival, but for efficiency, allowing groups to process food more quickly and share it more widely. For wood, a different problem demanded a different solution. The first woodworking tools were thicker, heavier, designed to withstand pressure without breaking. Choppers, adzes, and primitive wedges began to emerge, shaped by hundreds of experiments, their forms evolving to split branches, carve handles, and shape shelters. Wood was not just fuel or cover, but a material waiting to be transformed into spears, digging sticks, and even simple frames for carrying loads. Preparing hides for clothing and shelter presented its own challenges. Scrapers, sturdy, flat-edged stones, became the answer. Their task was patient and repetitive, to separate flesh from skin, to thin and soften hides, to turn the bounty of the hunt into warmth and protection. Over time, these scrapers took on refined shapes, their edges honed for efficiency, their surfaces smoothed by endless use. Bones, too, offered new opportunities for invention. Sharpened splinters became awls for piercing holes, fine needles for stitching, and even early forms of fishing hooks. The tough, resilient quality of bone made it an ideal material for specialized tools, especially in regions where stone was scarce or the environment demanded innovation. With each new task, a new form emerged. The people who made and used these tools became artisans in the truest sense. Their work was guided not only by need, but by pride and skill. Old traditions grew richer as elders taught the secrets of shape and material, passing down not just methods, but the reasons behind them. Each specialized tool became a testament to ingenuity, a marker of a society learning to look beyond the immediate, to plan and prepare for what lay ahead. This specialization did more than make daily life easier. It reshaped social dynamics and deepened bonds within groups. Those who excelled at making scrapers or needles, choppers or blades, gained respect and a special place in the community. Tool making itself became a shared craft, a conversation across generations and campfires, where knowledge was traded, refined, and remembered. What began as simple necessity evolved into artistry. The world of the first artisans was filled with purpose-built tools, each one a quiet declaration that humans would not be limited by nature's offerings. They would carve out their own answers, one task at a time, transforming the world not only with their hands, but with their imagination. The rise of specialized tools marked a turning point, the moment when craft became culture, and the seeds of civilization were sown in stone, wood, and bone. The story of humanity's tools is not one of static achievement, but of restless transformation. Once the first specialized implements appeared, the urge to improve never faded. The world itself seemed to conspire to keep people inventing. Climates shifted, herds migrated, forests vanished, and new challenges emerged with each passing generation. No one could afford to stand still. To survive was to adapt, And to adapt meant to change not only oneself, but the very things held in hand. Long before written history, the Earth was in constant motion. Ice ages advanced and retreated, carving new landscapes and burying old ones. Where there had once been grasslands, forests grew thick. Where rivers once flowed, deserts took their place. As people moved across these changing terrains, the old ways didn't always work. The tool that sliced thick hides on the open plain was no help in dense woods, where slender branches needed to be cut and woven. A scraper made for reindeer hides was useless when the herd moved on and only tough, sinewy game remained. Each change in the environment forced a question: how could daily tasks be done more easily, more efficiently, more safely? As people migrated, chasing herds, seeking shelter from storms, exploring new territories, they carried with them the memory of past solutions, but never let that memory limit their possibilities. Tools became experiments, ideas in stone and bone, tested and remade for every new challenge. The need to keep moving meant that tools had to be lighter, more portable, or able to serve multiple roles. Sometimes this meant returning to the basics and rethinking everything, combining old shapes in new ways or abandoning them altogether. The desire for improvement was not only driven by hardship, but by ambition. There was pride in making something better, a blade that cut cleaner, a spear that flew farther, a shelter that stood against the rain. Success meant more than comfort. It meant survival for loved ones, security for children, and status among peers. The best tool makers were respected, their innovations watched and imitated by others. The community's memory grew deeper with each breakthrough, as lessons learned in one generation were shared and refined by the next. Sometimes tools changed simply because new materials became available. A tribe might stumble upon a deposit of obsidian, the volcanic glass so sharp it could shave hair. Suddenly, knives and arrowheads gained a new edge, and hunting became more effective. Or perhaps a wandering group found dense, straight branches perfect for making long spears. And with this, hunting strategies and social organization evolved as well. Yet the most profound changes often came from within, the human refusal to be satisfied with good enough. Even when a tool did its job, the mind kept searching for flaws. Could it be lighter, sharper, stronger? Could it save time, save effort, save lives? The challenge of nature became a dialogue, a back and forth between the limits set by the world and the possibilities imagined by the mind. In every corner of the ancient world, the record of this ongoing evolution can still be read. Stone points grew more refined, their symmetry almost mathematical. Scrapers became thinner, handles more comfortable, designs more beautiful. In some places, people began to combine materials, binding stone blades to wooden shafts, inventing the first true composite tools. Through every shift, of climate, of landscape, of circumstance, humans proved themselves not just as survivors, but as innovators. Their tools became a mirror of their adaptability, a testament to the refusal to accept the world as it was given. From the first hand axe to the finest arrowhead, each improvement was a quiet act of defiance, a statement that the story of invention would never truly end. In this way, the evolution of tools is the evolution of humanity itself, a restless, hopeful journey toward mastery, meaning, and a future yet unwritten. There came a point in early human history when stone, for all its usefulness, was no longer enough. The world was too complex, the needs too varied for any single material to satisfy the restless demands of survival and invention. Slowly, a new chapter opened, a chapter where eyes turned not only downward, searching for the perfect rock, but upward and outward, toward the living world of trees and the quiet remains of animals. The age of stone did not end, it simply welcomed new companions. Wood and bone entered the story, and everything changed. At first, these materials were encountered by necessity. A fallen branch might become a digging stick, rough and unshaped, but effective for reaching tubers deep in the soil. A broken limb left behind by a hunted animal could be sharpened on a rock and used to pierce or pry. Bone, with its remarkable combination of strength and flexibility, opened doors stone alone could not. It could be shaped into points and awls, hooks and needles. Wood, with its lightness and resilience, provided handles and shafts, frames and levers. Soon, what had started as improvisation became intention. The shift from single material tools to combinations brought a new burst of creativity. Early toolmakers realized that stone could be made sharper and more durable when attached to a wooden handle. The first composite tools were born, a sharp flake bound to a stick with strips of sinew, bark, or plant fibers, the ancient ancestor of the axe and the spear. This breakthrough allowed people to multiply the power of their own bodies. A stone hand axe could chop and split, but a stone blade on a wooden handle could swing harder, reach farther, and strike with greater force. Bone, too, invited its own experiments. The natural curves and hollows of animal remains suggested endless uses. Ribs became shovels, antlers became picks, jawbones turned into scrapers. Some of these tools were so well designed that their basic forms would persist for millennia. Bone's ability to take a fine point allowed for the first sewing needles, making clothing from hides more effective and comfortable. With needle and thread, people could stitch together shelter, bags, and warm garments, expanding their world in every direction. The addition of wood and bone did more than add options. It changed the very nature of invention. The act of assembling different materials forced people to think in new ways, to experiment with bindings and joins, to test the limits of each resource. The materials themselves became partners, stone providing the edge, wood giving reach and control, bone offering flexibility or delicacy. Each tool became a small collaboration, a blend of strengths chosen with care. This new versatility was a leap forward. Hunters could now make longer, deadlier spears able to reach prey at a safer distance. Fishermen crafted barbed hooks from bone, bringing new kinds of food within reach. Gatherers used digging sticks to unearth roots and tubers, expanding their diets. The act of shaping and combining materials gave rise to a sense of purpose, pride, and even artistry. Over time, handles were smoothed for comfort, bindings decorated, forms refined. Some tools took on symbolic value, carried as badges of skill or tokens of belonging. Perhaps most importantly, this expansion of materials and techniques unlocked fresh possibilities for cooperation and knowledge sharing. No single person could master every step. Some became experts in chipping flint, others in carving bone or shaping wood. Skills were taught and traded, and with every new combination, the story of humanity grew richer, more connected, and more ambitious. The moment humans began working with more than stone was the moment their relationship with the world truly deepened. The landscape itself became a living workshop, every part of nature offering some promise if only one learned to see and combine. In these first acts of material blending, we glimpse the spirit that would one day build bridges and carve sculptures, raise cities, and send messages across oceans. A spirit that started, long ago, with the careful pairing of stone, wood, and bone. Behind every innovation in the ancient world stood a human face, a pair of hands working quietly, a mind spinning with questions, and eyes trained to notice what others overlooked. Yet the names of these first inventors have vanished, lost to time like footprints washed from a riverbank. All that remain are their tools and the silent stories they tell. Even so, one can imagine how, among the scattered bands of early humans, there were always a few who seemed to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. A few whose curiosity and skill would quietly change the lives of everyone around them. Picture a group gathered around a fire, the day's hunt behind them. Someone sits apart, turning a bone or a stone in their hands, absorbed in the small mysteries of shape and function. These early makers, the first engineers and artisans, were not set apart by age or strength, but by a restless urge to experiment. They watched the flight of a thrown spear, the fracture of stone, the pattern of wear on a favorite tool. They remembered what worked and what failed, their minds a living library of silent trials and errors. Within these ancient communities, such innovators became quiet legends. Their successes, whether a sharper blade, a stronger spear, or a new way to fasten a point to a shaft, spread by imitation and quiet admiration. It's likely that others sought to learn from them, watching their hands, copying their gestures, eager for a chance to make something as fine. Perhaps children shadowed these masters, drawn by the clack of stones or the careful carving of bone, learning not by words, but by example and patient repetition. The very idea of the teacher was born not from formal lessons, but from observation and demonstration. The group's best toolmaker might show how to strike a stone at just the right angle, or how to split sinew for binding. Around these early instructors, knowledge pooled and grew, becoming richer with every new experiment. While most people made the tools they needed, a select few pushed boundaries, testing new materials, trying unfamiliar forms, even risking failure for the hope of something better. Of course, no one signed their work, and no invention came with a name. The tools themselves were anonymous, shaped and reshaped by many hands over time. But within the group, the story of an invention might linger, the memory of who first figured out how to notch a blade or pierce a hole in a bone. These tales, passed from voice to voice, became the group's own mythology, a way of honoring the spirit of invention even when the details faded. Sometimes, the inventions themselves became a kind of signature. A tool with a particularly elegant shape or a new technique for hafting a spear might spread from one group to another, a quiet tribute to the unmaimed genius who first brought it to life. Across rivers and through forests, the influence of a skilled maker could ripple outward, changing distant lives and leaving a hidden legacy in the artifacts uncovered thousands of years later. In this way, the earliest inventors were both individuals and part of something larger. Their ingenuity belonged to the group, lifting everyone's chances and deepening the shared pool of wisdom. The spark of a single mind became the light that guided many. It is a mystery that can never be fully unraveled. Who first saw the tool in the stone? Who first dared to try the untried? But in every chipped blade, every shaped bone, there is the echo of those first masters, and the timeless truth that progress is built on the dreams and risks of the few for the good of all. The question of how early humans shared their growing store of knowledge, how a single insight became a community's inheritance, remains one of the most intriguing puzzles of our distant past. Even in the absence of written words or even a fully developed language, it is clear that the wisdom of survival had to be passed on. The difference between knowing how to shape a blade and not knowing could mean the difference between life and hardship. The story of the first teachers and students, the first classroom under the open sky, is woven into every tool that survived the ages. Imagine the daily life of an ancient group, clustered around a fire or at the edge of a riverbank. Children would watch as adults chipped at stones or carved at bones, their small hands itching to mimic the motions. Learning began with observation, a deep and attentive kind of seeing. Eyes tracked every movement, every twist of the wrist or tap of the hammerstone. Gestures became language long before speech was common. A simple nod, a pointed finger, the repetition of a motion all signaled what to do and how to do it. There must have been moments of shared focus, when several pairs of eyes turned to a skilled maker as they demonstrated a tricky technique. The sound of a blade striking stone, the rhythm of scraping, the way a tool was tested and examined. These became lessons written not in ink but in muscle memory. Imitation was the earliest pedagogy, the copying of expert hands until the motions felt natural and right. Young learners, full of questions they couldn't yet ask, learned by doing, by failing, and by trying again. But knowledge wasn't only practical. It was often shared through story and symbol. As language slowly took shape, so did the tradition of narrative. Tales of a hunt, of tools made and lost, of challenges overcome. Around the evening fire, older members of the group might gesture to the tools at their feet, using them to illustrate how to sharpen a blade or fix a broken spear. Some researchers believe that early drawings and marks on cave walls, while often seen as art, may have also served as records or guides, a visual memory to help recall how something was made, or what kind of animal could be hunted with a certain weapon. There was no rigid boundary between play and work, between learning and living. A game of throwing sticks might secretly hone the skills needed to hunt. Collecting stones along the river could turn into an impromptu lesson in which rocks to select for tool making. Sometimes the best teachers were not the oldest, but those who had just mastered a skill and could share it with fresh enthusiasm and empathy for mistakes. The act of teaching became a kind of shared ritual, reinforcing bonds within the group. Those who taught passed on more than information. They transmitted a sense of belonging, pride, and responsibility. Success was celebrated not just as an individual victory, but as a sign that the group's knowledge would survive another day, another season. Over time, these early forms of instruction laid the foundation for everything that followed. The ability to teach and learn from one another became humanity's greatest inheritance, more valuable than any single tool. The skills of the past lived on in new hands, each generation building on the last. The memory of countless teachers carried silently into the future. In the flickering light of those ancient fires, the first lessons were given, and the story of education began. Sometimes the ground yields up something that stops even the most seasoned archaeologist in their tracks. A tool so sophisticated or surprising that it seems to whisper of minds reaching far beyond their age. These are not always grand or beautiful objects. More often, they are simple things, worn by use and time. Yet their very existence challenges our ideas of what early humans were capable of, and reminds us just how inventive our ancestors truly were. Consider, for example, the tiny bone needles unearthed from the depths of ancient caves in Siberia. Fashioned some 40,000 years ago, these slender tools are pierced at one end, the holes smooth and even. They could only have been made by steady hands and sharp eyes, using tools designed with precision. Their purpose was clear: to sew together hides, joining scraps of fur into warm, tailored clothing. The level of skill and planning required to create such a needle and then to use it for making fitted garments hints at a society not just surviving, but carefully crafting their daily lives. In Africa, archaeologists have found blades and points made from obsidian so finely worked that their edges rival modern surgical scalpels. Some of these stone blades are thousands of years older than the first cities. Their makers selected volcanic glass, knowing it would flake in razor-thin sheets, then shaped it with meticulous care. The result? Weapons and tools of astonishing sharpness and efficiency. Evidence that early humans were not merely experimenting, but mastering their craft. Another remarkable discovery came from a peat bog in northern Europe, where scientists uncovered ancient wooden spears, long, perfectly balanced, and weighted for flight. These spears, carved from dense spruce and tipped for durability, date back more than 300,000 years. Their design required knowledge of aerodynamics and wood properties, showing that even at this early date, people were thinking far ahead, planning for both the hunt and the throw. Some finds are less dramatic in appearance, but no less significant. In caves in southern France, fragments of pigment-stained shells reveal the first paint palettes, used by people to mix colors and decorate themselves or their surroundings. These tools, carefully shaped and sometimes even adorned, suggest not just practical intelligence, but a sense of beauty and symbolism. Perhaps most unexpected of all are the early composite tools. Axes made by attaching stone blades to wooden handles with plant fibers or animal sinew. Such inventions required knowledge of materials and the insight to combine them, a kind of prehistoric engineering. The marks left by wear and repairs tell us these tools were treasured and maintained, not simply thrown away at the first sign of damage. There are even artifacts that suggest experimentation with heat and chemistry. At sites in Africa, lumps of ochre were ground and mixed with animal fat or plant sap to create durable paints and adhesives. In the Near East, researchers have uncovered evidence that people were using controlled fire to harden stone and bone, increasing their strength and usefulness. Each of these discoveries tells a story of minds that refuse to be confined by their circumstances. The tools and artifacts that emerge from the earth remind us that our ancestors were always reaching, always searching for better ways to solve problems. Their world was harsh, but their imaginations were limitless. Every surprising find is a silent message from the past. We have always been makers, always dreamers, always a little ahead of our time. The quiet revolution brought by early tools did more than reshape stones and bones. It transformed every corner of daily life, leaving nothing untouched. With each new implement, ancient people were not simply making tasks easier, they were reinventing what it meant to live together, to eat, to hunt, to protect, and to belong. Before the age of tools, survival was a solitary and uncertain affair. Food was scavenged, caught by hand, or wrestled from the earth and bones with raw strength. The appearance of sharp blades and sturdy scrapers changed the menu forever. Now, tough hides could be removed with speed, thick bones cracked for their rich marrow, and the once wasted scraps of meat scraped clean. Tools opened up new sources of nutrition. Roots could be dug, nuts cracked, fish filleted, and grains ground into meal. No longer limited to what their teeth and nails could manage, people expanded their diets, gaining strength and endurance that shaped the very course of evolution. This abundance did not only feed bodies, it brought people together. Preparing food became a communal task, an assembly of hands around a carcass, passing blades, sharing spoils, and learning side by side. Knowledge of butchering and cooking spread quickly, as did the quiet pride of mastering a new technique. As diets improved, so did health, resilience, and even social ties. Meals gathered around a fire or beneath a shelter grew into moments of fellowship, where stories, laughter, and lessons could be exchanged alongside morsels of food. Hunting, too, underwent a profound transformation. The spear, the throwing stick, and the carefully shaped point enabled group strategies that had been impossible before. Bands could coordinate their movements, drive herds into traps, or ambush prey from a distance. These shared efforts demanded planning and trust, forging bonds among hunters and creating new roles within the group. A well-timed throw or a sharp point could mean the difference between plenty and hunger, and those who excelled earned respect and influence. Tools were also the first defense against the world's dangers. With sharpened sticks and axes, people could keep predators at bay or fortify their shelters against the elements. The act of building, constructing barriers, weaving branches, laying stones, grew into an expression of security and cooperation. Protection became a group responsibility, and the invention of defensive tools allowed people to settle more confidently, turning dangerous places into homes. Beyond survival, tools began to influence relationships and the very structure of society. Some became specialists, renowned for their skill with stone or bone, respected as craftsmen or teachers. Others led hunts or taught children to carve and shape. The division of labor, the recognition of expertise, and the value of shared effort all took root as daily tasks grew more complex. Tools carried meaning, too, beyond their immediate function. A beautifully crafted scraper or spear point could be a sign of status, a gift, or a token passed down through generations. The sharing of implements, the teaching of craft, and the passing of knowledge all wove invisible threads between people, turning loose gatherings into enduring communities. The impact of tools on ancient life was as profound as any invention that would follow. They redefined what was possible, expanded the world of available resources, and taught people to work, live, and dream together. In every sharpened blade, every polished bone, every mark of wear, there is a story of lives changed, of hands made strong not just by need, but by the joy of creation and the strength of belonging. As tools became an inseparable part of daily life, something unexpected and beautiful began to unfold. A new dimension that stretched beyond mere survival. Where once a blade was valued only for its sharpness or a scraper for its efficiency, now there appeared hints of something more. A love of form, a sense of beauty, the first stirrings of culture woven into the objects that ancient people shaped with their hands. The signs were subtle at first. On the surface of a stone axe, a pattern of grooves was added, not because it cut better, but because it pleased the eye or made the tool feel unique in the maker's grip. A bone needle, already perfected for sewing, was polished smooth and etched with faint lines, as if its creator wanted it to be admired as much as used. Over time, certain forms became favorites, repeated and refined by different hands and across generations. It wasn't long before styles could be traced to specific regions, groups, or even individuals. Some tools were broad and hefty, others slim and elegant, each reflecting the choices and personality of their makers. This new layer of artistry was more than idle decoration. It spoke of pride and meaning, of tools as not just instruments, but as symbols and companions. A beautifully flaked blade might be set aside for special hunts, a finely shaped scraper presented as a gift or offered in trade. The effort to beautify a tool, chiseling, carving, smoothing, or coloring with ochre, was time-consuming, a luxury afforded only by those whose skills and resources allowed them to do more than merely survive. Such creativity was infectious. Around a fire or in the shared light of a shelter, new designs sparked admiration and imitation. Young makers learned not just the functional rules of toolmaking, but the small flourishes that set one craftsperson apart from another. The tradition of innovation blended with the joy of self-expression, and as these aesthetic details spread, they became the seeds of identity and belonging. Tools also began to take on deeper significance. Some were buried with their owners, treasured long after their usefulness had faded. Others were shaped into pendants or beads, strung together and worn as adornments or symbols of status. A handful of artifacts even seem to have had no practical function at all. Small figurines, mysterious objects, whose only purpose may have been to tell a story, invite good fortune, or simply bring joy. These early artistic touches revealed a change not only in what people made, but in how they saw themselves and their world. The act of crafting became an act of culture, the tool a canvas for ideas, memories, and dreams. Through each chip and curve, ancient people began to mark their place in the world, not just as survivors, but as creators and storytellers. The evolution of tools into art signaled the dawn of shared symbols and collective meaning. It showed that humanity's greatest achievements are not simply the things we make, but the ideas, hopes, and beauty we pour into them. Even today, in the museum's quiet glow or the palm of a curious hand, the legacy of those first artists and makers endures. A reminder that from the moment we shaped tools, we were already shaping culture, and with it, the unfolding story of who we are. The invention and refinement of tools marked a turning point not only for daily life, but for the very direction of human destiny. Where before, each day had been shaped by uncertainty and the urgent need to survive, now a new horizon began to emerge. A world in which people could look beyond the present, imagine the future, and lay the groundwork for something greater than themselves. With tools in their hands, ancient people took their first bold steps towards civilization. The most profound shift was psychological. Tools brought control and reliability, freeing people from the relentless unpredictability of nature. With sharper blades and sturdier implements, food could be prepared more efficiently and in greater quantities. Soon, there was not only enough to eat for today, but sometimes even a surplus. This allowed the very first acts of planning, preserving meat by drying it over smoke, storing edible roots and nuts in woven baskets, and setting aside precious materials for times of scarcity. The creation of reserves, however small, was the earliest form of security, and it changed how people thought about the world around them. With the pressure of immediate hunger eased, people gained the freedom to settle for longer periods in places rich in resources. Temporary camps grew into well-organized shelters with tools for every task: digging sticks for the earth, blades for preparing food, scrapers for cleaning hides, and hammers for building. Fires were tended and protected, becoming the heart of these early communities, a steady source of warmth, light, and cooked food, drawing people together at the end of each day. The emergence of permanent or semi-permanent dwellings was more than a matter of comfort. It was an act of transformation. People began to shape their environment, clearing brush, arranging stones for walls, weaving reeds for mats and roofs. Tool use allowed for the creation of storage pits and shelters, making life not only safer but more predictable. Families and small groups could return to the same place season after season, confident that the labor invested would repay itself many times over. With greater stability came opportunities for cooperation and specialization. No longer pressed to move constantly in search of food, people could share skills and divide labor. Some excelled at crafting tools, others at hunting, gathering, or tending the fire. This subtle social organization strengthened the bonds between individuals, making the group more resilient in the face of challenge or change. Knowledge accumulated and was shared more easily. Children grew up watching their elders build, shape, and create, inheriting a sense of continuity and purpose. These small but crucial shifts laid the foundation for everything that followed: the rise of villages and later cities, the development of trade and shared rituals, the invention of art, ceremony, and storytelling. Each innovation, from the first woven basket to the earliest food store, was an echo of that original moment when a tool transformed not just the task at hand, but the way people imagined what was possible. Tools did not simply solve problems, they inspired dreams of something more. They allowed ancient people to plan, to cooperate, and to build a life larger than any one day or season. In the shadow of a shelter, beside a carefully tended fire, the seeds of civilization took root, growing quietly with every new tool, every new idea, and every small act of looking ahead. The transformation brought by tools was not limited to hands and habits. It reached deep into the very architecture of the mind. Long before the first cities or written words, something extraordinary was happening inside the heads of the toolmakers. A quiet revolution that would shape not just what people did, but who they were and how they thought. The story of early tools is, in many ways, the story of the changing human brain. Every time a stone was shaped, a branch carved, or a bone pierced, it demanded careful attention and control. The fingers learned new patterns. The eyes measured and compared, noticing fine details and subtle differences. These repetitive, skilled tasks began to stimulate and strengthen regions of the brain connected to planning, coordination, and memory. Over generations, as the demands of toolmaking grew more complex, so did the minds of those who practiced it. Hands and thoughts became partners, each pushing the other to greater refinement. With each chipped flake and bound handle, a new kind of intelligence emerged, a blend of imagination, foresight, and problem-solving. The toolmaker had to picture the finished object before it existed, to remember past attempts and anticipate future needs. This capacity for mental rehearsal, planning steps, envisioning outcomes, experimenting in the mind before acting, was a leap beyond simple instinct. It was the dawn of abstract thought. But the changes ran deeper still. The collaboration required to teach and learn toolmaking fostered richer communication. Gestures and shared activities soon needed words, names for objects, instructions for tasks, descriptions of materials and results. As groups grew more skilled at passing down knowledge, language itself began to evolve. The back and forth of teaching and learning, the subtle differences between tools and their uses, demanded vocabulary and structure. With tools in hand, people found themselves reaching for new ways to share ideas, questions, and memories. The brain responded in kind. Areas involved in language, symbolic thought, and social understanding flourished alongside those devoted to manual skill. In this intricate feedback loop, tool use shaped the mind, and the mind shaped the next generation of tools. The complexity of group life also pushed the brain toward greater empathy, memory, and cooperation. Navigating the social world, deciding who taught, who learned, who hunted, who crafted, required a growing ability to read intentions, plan together, and remember shared experiences. Perhaps most remarkable of all was the effect on identity and self-awareness. Making and using tools encouraged reflection, not only on the world, but on one's own actions, mistakes, and successes. This capacity to step back, to analyze and adapt became a hallmark of the human mind. In a sense, every tool was a small mirror, reflecting both the needs of the moment and the inner life of its maker. The process was slow, unfolding over thousands of generations. But with every new tool, every innovation and shared lesson, humanity's greatest tool, the brain, grew more sophisticated. The mind that could shape stone would one day shape language, art, and belief. From the first hesitant blows on a piece of flint came a cascade of changes that would eventually lead to stories, songs, dreams, and civilizations. The link between the hand and the mind is unbroken. Even now, when we create, build, or teach, we echo those ancient beginnings. The evolution of tools is inseparable from the evolution of thought. And in every act of making, we honor the long journey of the mind that learned not just to survive, but to imagine, understand, and change the world. With the blossoming of creativity and the strengthening of minds and hands, ancient people eventually crossed yet another invisible threshold, one that turned simple tools into systems, isolated objects into orchestrated actions. It was the dawn of engineering, the moment when humanity's imagination stretched beyond the single blade or point, and began to shape the environment itself through invention, cooperation, and planning. This shift brought about not only clever tools, but the first real machines, primitive yet profound, echoes of every later feat of engineering. It began perhaps with a problem that no single implement could solve. Large animals, for instance, were far too powerful or fast for lone hunters with mere spears. Here, a new solution was born. Not a better spear, but a better strategy. Across open plains or forested valleys, people devised traps and pitfalls. Hidden pits lined with stakes, camouflaged by branches and earth, or stone-lined enclosures that funneled animals into waiting hands. Constructing these devices required more than brute strength. It demanded foresight, teamwork, and the ability to plan steps and anticipate outcomes. A small revolution in how people approached challenges. The creation of traps marked a significant leap in technical thinking. Instead of confronting every problem head-on, early engineers learned to use time and space to their advantage. By setting snares woven from fibers, building deadfalls that used gravity, or arranging sharpened sticks triggered by a careless step, people harnessed the laws of nature for their own ends. A successful trap was not just the sum of its materials, it was an idea realized in wood, stone, and rope, patiently built and carefully hidden. This spirit of invention soon spread. To carry water from a stream, people learned to hollow out logs or stitch animal skins into bags and pouches. Simple levers, a branch wedged under a rock, allowed even small groups to move heavy objects or break into hard earth. Rolling logs made it possible to drag loads across great distances, transforming how people built shelters and moved camps. With every new device, the toolkit expanded, and the definition of what was possible grew broader. Some of the earliest mechanisms bordered on the ingenious. Bow drills spun by hand made fire or pierced bone, freeing people from the endless friction of simpler methods. Weighted throwing sticks extended the reach and power of the human arm, letting hunters bring down birds or small game at a distance. Even the first woven nets and fish traps, though humble in appearance, represented a deep understanding of animal behavior and the clever manipulation of the environment. Such innovations were never solitary achievements. Building a trap, dragging a log, or weaving a net required communication, shared labor, and the willingness to coordinate efforts for a goal greater than any one person could reach alone. These projects deepened social bonds, teaching new lessons about leadership, teamwork, and the value of pooling knowledge and resources. Each small system, each trap, lever, or primitive mechanism was a prototype for all future inventions. The lessons learned in crafting these early machines would echo down the ages, giving rise to pulleys, wheels, gears, and every sophisticated device that followed. In every cleverly constructed pitfall or tensioned snare, we can glimpse the first inklings of the engineer's mind, a spirit of playful experimentation, patient problem-solving, and the unyielding belief that the world could be reshaped not just by force, but by wisdom and design. Thus, with every trap set and every primitive mechanism built, the path of invention stretched further, carrying humanity from the wild unpredictability of the ancient world toward the bright promise of every future possibility. As the centuries unspooled and humanity spread across continents, tools evolved in remarkable and varied ways. The implements once shaped by necessity and chance began to carry the distinct fingerprints of geography, climate, and culture. From the sun-baked plains of Africa to the dense forests of Europe and the river valleys of Asia, each environment whispered its own challenges, and in response, people developed new styles, techniques, and even schools of invention. The story of tools became a living map of human adaptation and ingenuity. In Africa, often called the cradle of innovation, early toolmakers faced landscapes teeming with both opportunity and peril. Here, the Acheulean hand axe rose to prominence, a beautifully symmetrical, teardrop-shaped tool, its edges sharp enough for butchering game and tough enough for digging. These axes, found scattered across the continent, show a tradition of careful flaking and balanced form, evolving over thousands of years. As the climate shifted and grasslands alternated with woodlands, the tools changed as well, growing thinner or more robust, reflecting the endless dance with the environment. Moving north and east, the forests and rivers of Europe posed different puzzles. The cold and changing seasons demanded new ways to survive. Toolmakers there honed the art of making slender blades and fine points from flint, inventing new methods of striking and shaping stone. The Solutrean culture, for instance, produced laurel leaf points of astonishing thinness and delicacy, the result of countless experiments in pressure flaking. In the caves of France and Spain, people left behind not just blades, but bone harpoons, sewing needles, and even the earliest known fishing tackle, each responding to the bounty and the hardships of their land. Asia, stretching from arid deserts to lush river valleys, became a patchwork of innovation. In some places, obsidian was plentiful, leading to the creation of exquisite, glass-like blades prized for their sharpness. In others, bamboo became the raw material of choice, its natural strength and flexibility perfect for spears, arrows, and even early water containers. Across Central and East Asia, new techniques arose. The microblade tradition, with tiny, standardized flakes set into wooden or bone handles, allowed people to create multi-use tools that were easy to repair and adapt. The toolkit here was as dynamic as the landscape, light and portable for nomads, sturdy and specialized for settled farmers. Even within the same era, tools could be wildly different depending on local resources and needs. Groups living by the sea crafted fish hooks and net weights from shell and bone, while those in forests shaped axes and adzes for woodworking, clearing land, and building shelters. The climate itself was a powerful sculptor. In regions where winters were long and fierce, tools for sewing warm clothing or carving snowshoes became essential. Where game was scarce, traps and snares grew more sophisticated. Where rivers flowed, boats and paddles appeared. The rise of regional styles also marked the dawn of what could be called schools of technology, distinct traditions passed from one generation to the next. Toolmakers learned not only from their own experience, but from the accumulated wisdom of their ancestors and neighbors. Techniques were refined, aesthetics developed, and certain shapes became the signature of a place and a people. Over time, these traditions became deeply woven into the fabric of culture, their echoes still visible in the artifacts that survive. In this great mosaic, progress was driven not just by genius, but by geography and necessity. The challenges of a particular place called forth the best of human creativity, and the solutions found there shaped the destiny of those who called it home. The diversity of tools across epochs and regions is a testament to the adaptability, resourcefulness, and restless spirit that have always defined the human journey. Each blade and point, each awl and axe tells a story, not just of survival, but of a world continually remade by the minds and hands of its inhabitants. For every tool that became a staple in the daily life of ancient people, countless others faded into obscurity, forgotten, abandoned, or remembered only as curious relics beneath the soil. The evolution of human invention was never a straight line, but a web of experiment and improvisation, full of both triumphs and dead ends. Some ideas caught on and spread like wildfire. Others lingered on the fringes or vanished entirely, leaving behind mysteries that still puzzle archaeologists today. Sometimes, a tool was simply too specialized for its time. In a corner of ancient Europe, archaeologists have found finely worked bone objects, carefully shaped and smoothed, whose purpose is now lost to us. They may have served a specific function, perhaps a ritual or a unique hunting strategy, but for reasons unknown, these tools never became widespread. Maybe the need they addressed disappeared, or perhaps the skill required to make them was too rare, limiting their reach. Other inventions failed because they were ahead of their environment. In regions where materials were scarce, complex composite tools, combining stone, wood, sinew, and resin, might have offered tremendous utility, but assembling them required resources or know-how that not every group could muster. Some artifacts show attempts at intricate hafting or binding techniques that never became common practice, perhaps because they demanded too much time, precision, or maintenance. Social factors also played a part. Tools and techniques could be tightly linked to specific groups or even individuals. A brilliant maker's innovation might not spread if others did not see its value, or if the knowledge was guarded as a secret. In some cases, a tool may have been associated with a particular ritual or taboo, restricting its use to a small circle and ensuring it did not pass into everyday life. The disappearance of a group, a migration, or a change in leadership could mean the end of an entire technological tradition. There are also examples of tools that were simply outperformed by better ideas. A heavy scraper that worked well in one climate was soon replaced by a lighter, sharper blade as new materials or techniques became available. In places where obsidian was discovered, for example, older stone tools quickly fell out of favor, their edges no match for the new glassy sharpness. The march of innovation can be unforgiving, and the best solution for one generation may become obsolete for the next. Some artifacts are so strange that their purpose remains a mystery. Oddly shaped stones with grooves, perforated antlers, miniature tools too small for practical use, all hint at experiments that didn't quite work out or that served needs now lost to time. Perhaps they were toys, teaching aids, symbols of status, or the products of moments of creative play. The line between failure and inspiration has always been thin, and every forgotten tool is a testament to the boldness of human imagination. The reasons why some tools stuck and others vanished are as complex as humanity itself. Needs changed, environments shifted, and fashions in technology rose and fell. What remains clear is that failure was never the end of the story. Every abandoned artifact, every curious relic, played a role in teaching and shaping the minds of those who came after. In their quiet way, even the forgotten tools remind us that invention thrives on risk and resilience, that the willingness to try and to try again has always been at the heart of progress. Throughout the long sweep of prehistory, the tools and techniques that once seemed indispensable sometimes vanished as mysteriously as they appeared. The record of ancient ingenuity is littered not only with forgotten implements, but with entire lost traditions, ways of shaping, building, and surviving that flickered out and left only faint traces for archaeologists to ponder. The reasons for this disappearance are as varied and enigmatic as the artifacts themselves, shaped by forces both within and far beyond human control. Natural disasters could wipe out whole communities and the skills they carried. A flood might submerge settlements, scattering or burying precious tools, and leaving survivors to rebuild with whatever knowledge remained. Droughts, fires, volcanic eruptions, or disease could disrupt generations of hard-won tradition, forcing people to migrate or adapt to new conditions where old methods no longer applied. In the sudden upheaval of catastrophe, even the most ingenious technology might be lost, replaced by simpler solutions that suited survival in changed and harsher circumstances. Migration played its own unpredictable role. As groups moved to new territories, driven by climate shifts, dwindling resources, or the search for better hunting grounds, they often left behind not only familiar landscapes, but also the raw materials and social networks their technologies depended on. A stoneworking tradition honed for generations might prove useless in a land with different rock, wood, or game. Techniques passed from parent to child could fade within a few lifetimes if conditions changed faster than skills could be adapted. Generational turnover brought subtler challenges. In societies without written language, all knowledge depended on memory, practice, and direct teaching. If elders were lost to illness or conflict, or if a group split and scattered, the delicate chain of transmission could break. Sometimes a technique survived only as a half-remembered story or a forgotten gesture, waiting to be rediscovered by later generations. Even in times of peace, the priorities of a community might shift. New leaders with different visions, new discoveries that overshadowed the old, or the simple forgetting that comes as old skills are no longer needed. Cultural choices, too, left their mark. Some knowledge was deliberately guarded, shared only among select individuals, or marked as sacred, making it more vulnerable to loss if those keepers vanished. At times, a change in ritual, belief, or group identity could prompt people to abandon certain practices, letting traditions slip away in favor of new ways that better suited the community's evolving values. And then there are the mysteries for which there may never be answers. Why did some technologies endure for thousands of years, almost unchanged, while others disappeared in a few generations? Why did some groups innovate endlessly, while others maintained ancient ways? The archaeology of lost knowledge is a puzzle of missing pieces, a reminder that history is shaped as much by forgetting as by remembering. What is clear is that the disappearance of ancient technologies was never simply failure or neglect. It was a dynamic process driven by the unpredictable interplay of environment, movement, memory, and choice. For every tradition that faded, another took its place, woven from both what was kept and what was let go. In this ever-changing landscape, the spirit of invention persisted, not in any one artifact or technique, but in the human willingness to adapt, to start anew, and to keep searching for answers in a world that never stands still. Peering back through the fog of time, modern scientists and thinkers have found more than just objects buried in the earth. They found a mirror held up to our own restless creativity. The study of ancient tools has done more than fill museum cases. It has transformed the way we see ourselves, our past, and our future. Each artifact tells a story not only of necessity, but of imagination and persistence, a lesson that continues to inspire those searching for solutions in the present day. Anthropologists, engineers, and designers have discovered in the chipped edges of stone blades and the subtle curves of bone needles a blueprint for innovation. By recreating the tools of our ancestors, modern researchers gain insight into how problem-solving evolved, how the mind learns to adapt, how failure gives birth to new ideas, and how teamwork and teaching turn simple inventions into lasting traditions. Experimental archaeology, where ancient techniques are brought back to life by modern hands, has led to breakthroughs in our understanding of material science, ergonomics, and even the origins of art and ritual. The patience and ingenuity required to transform raw nature into something useful are the very qualities that still drive discovery today. Beyond the laboratory, the legacy of the first toolmakers has sparked inspiration in fields as diverse as robotics, medicine, and architecture. Engineers have borrowed ideas from prehistoric hafting and binding, using ancient principles to design stronger joints and connections. Surgeons have marveled at the sharpness of obsidian blades, which even now surpass steel in delicacy and precision. Artists and architects find echoes of ancient symmetry and function in their own search for beauty and utility. The long view of prehistory reminds us that progress is rarely a straight line, but a journey of trial, error, and constant reinvention. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is philosophical. In each chipped stone and polished bone lies a testament to the power of asking, "What if?" The first people who picked up a rock and saw not just an object, but a possibility, set into motion a chain of events that still shapes every aspect of our world. The curiosity that once turned a simple stone into a tool is the same force that sends spacecraft beyond the stars and drives a child to build something new from scraps.